I wonder if it'll tell us when we're live.
I think it will.
It just showed me that I was live.
Oh yeah, we are live. Hi. Okay. I think we can go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody who is logging in, finishing dinner, finishing off with your day's activities. Thank you so much for joining us for Poetry from the Field from the YubaSutter Regional Arts Council. My name is Marcelo Hernandez Castillo, the Poet Laureate of Yuba and Sutter counties, and I am thrilled, beyond thrilled, to welcome these incredible souls, poets Jasminne and Lupe Mendez. And we're going to be hearing a little bit from their work, respectively. And I have a few questions geared towards them. And then if we have some time, we can open it up at the end for some Q&A. But first, I just wanted to talk a little bit about them. Jasminne is a poet. She is a playwright, an author. She's a podcast host and the author of two poetry/prose collections, Island of Dreams from Floricanto Press and Night Blooming Jasmine, winner of the International Latino Poetry Award. These are personal essays and poetry from Arte Público Press. And her first collection, full collection, Machete, is forthcoming from the Acrílica series from Noemi Press. Look up Noemi Press. They are incredible. And her YA memoir, A Bucket of Dirty Water, Memories of My Girlhood, and her debut picture book, Josefina's Habichuelas, will be in the fall. Will be released in the fall of 2021 from Arte Público Press. So a long list of accolades. Beyond that, Jasminne has had poetry and essays published or forthcoming in places like the New England Review, the Kenyan Review, Gold Coast, the Rumpus, and so many others. Most recently, in collaboration with Teatro Luna West in LA, in Teatro Milagro in Dallas, and the Urban Theater Company in Chicago, her play City Without Altar received a new play development grant from the National New Play Network Bridge Program. She's an MFA graduate from the Creative Writing Program at Rainier Writing Workshop at Pacific Lutheran University, a University of Houston alumni, and a Canto Mundo Fellow. She is based in Houston and is the co-founder and program director of the Houston-based Latinx literary arts organization, Tintero Projects, and co-hosts the poetry and writing podcast, as I said, Inkwell, in collaboration between Tintero Projects and Imprint Houston. There is a lot more that can be said about Jasminne, but I'll end by saying she's been a Kenyan Review Writers Workshop Fellow, as a Peter Taylor Fellow, and a Macondo and Vona alumni. She lives and works in Houston, Texas. And Lupe Mendez is the author of most recent book, author of Why I Am Like Tequila from Willow Books, which was the winner of the John A. Robertson Prize for Best First Book of Poetry, and honored as one of Houston Press's Creative 100s. And was awarded the Downs Intellectual Freedom Award for the defense of Mexican American studies and literature across the Southwest United States. He is founder of Tintero Projects, which works with emerging Latinx writers and other writers of color within the Texas Gulf Coast region. He earned an MFA at the University of Texas at El Paso and has received fellowships from Canto Mundo, Macondo, and the Crescent Literary Poetry Foundation's Emerging Poetry Incubator. His work can be found widely in places like the Kenyan Review, Gulf Coast, and most recently the Poem a Day Academy of American Poets series, and elsewhere. He co-hosts Inkwell, a collaborative podcast with Tintero Projects and Imprint, and he currently serves as the Literary Outreach Coordinator for Poets and Writers, Inc., Houston. And I'll talk a little bit about their work kind of after we hear them read. But first, I would like to perhaps maybe introduce Lupe to read. Lupe's work touches on both his Texas and his Mexican roots, stemming from the state of Jalisco. His work ranges from issues that deal with political concerns to the emotional in a way that intends to connect with both the novice reader and the skilled writer. So please welcome me and welcome in Lupe Mendez.
Buenas tardes. How's everybody doing? Marcelo, thank you for this opportunity. It's a treat to see you and hear you. So to start off, buenas tardes. Hope everybody's well. I'll jump right in. This first poem is dedicated to Los Escobar, a family here in Houston, who in the fall of 2017 were separated under the Trump administration's early beginnings of separating families and deporting individuals who would otherwise have been left alone here in the States. The epigraph, the poem, the title of the poem, How Candles Are Made, the epigraph, quote, "It was hard for me, but I still kept hope because I knew that my wife was by herself." Jose Escobar quoted in Houston Area Man Returns Home After Sudden Deportation in 2017. Houston Public Media, July 2019. The poem. A candle is made of paraffin wax, made of petrol, crude oil debajo de la tierra, donde viven los difuntos. And when I say difuntos, I mean we come from seeds. A candle is a spine that holds all our bodies. Our bodies are pools of nothing crude. When we pass on, we're so full on deseo, on wanting. Some kind person crosses our arms for us to help carry the things we hold on to. We want dreams to warm us in this deep sleep. Our bones are the last to melt away. A vela is made of all of us bones. A slick dream in the shape of a cylinder, a spine that gets lit. We glare, we become light, and sometimes when you look at Avela's tongue on fire, you become lost in the moment. You place everything into a flicker. Time is silent. That's what a wish is. A vela is a line lit on the nights when you are in La Union and she is here in Houston. You are far from each other and your dreams fit into a wick. It is a slow burn, and sometimes, even when the body breaks, the backbone doesn't. Light up again. When the rooms are full of shadows, there's one candle standing until there are two. And in your house, there are finally four standing together, and the glow is up. We watch this in the slender wisp of smoke building in your home. We watch your fingers meet. You are candle skins that spade a yellow touch. You are a burn of molten heart in a single llama. A candelabra that moves across every line in the sand, erasing every border of a room, every baseboard. Tonight, I light a vela for you, but you shine brighter. Together, you are always. Stay together. The second piece is from my next book project. I'm writing on Houston's ever slow digging in the heels movement towards desegregating public schools that did not occur until the fall of 1971 in response to an unconstitutional desegregation plan. Mexican families here in Houston boycotted the public school system and created huelga schools, strike schools, in response to this unconstitutional move. And so these huelga schools were community organized. didn't have a lot of money, and they taught the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic. So lots of churches and community centers served as the base for these schools. And so this is a form of a docu-poem based on part of this history, right? Rules at the Juan Marcos Huelga School, even the unspoken ones. This should be posted in every classroom until the end of the school year. One, no more than one child out of the classroom at one time. They might run away. A monarch butterfly tugged in the direction of the wind. 2, the upstairs classes will not make excess noise because there are no walls between classes and the noise carries downstairs too. Noise that needs to be made should flame out in a bonfire, out on the roof where sunlight can hear it all. 3, any mother coming into the classroom, send them to the principal's office unless they're the teacher's helper. They need to go to help the principal birth a school that can speak and spell the words revolución and work and hands and huelga. 4, no running in the hallways or stairs. Wait for nighttime, children, where you can run and race around in the dark, in the cool of the trees, yelling you caught a star on the tip of your tongue. Then you realize you ran around till morning, and it is the dew on the tips of tree leaves you taste. 5, no screaming or shouting in the classrooms, hallways, or stairways. Shout on paper. Write boldly in a book in the middle of an open field, in the street, in the classroom. Make sure your voice shrills. 6, no throwing of paper or trash on the floor. In my class, I will teach you to throw Molotov cocktails, bright orange ones that whistle in the air. And when they smash on those crazy school laws, they will burst in a bright yellow, the scent of lemon, burnt wood that will take over for a few days. 7, no one can go to Papa Burger. In the future, the streets are still the same. And in December, on a Tuesday afternoon in 2016, one of your descendants will be stabbed merely for standing in the day. The North Side knows a scar, knows body when it needs to mourn. 8, if you take your class to the park, be sure that everyone crosses the street going and coming. Move in packs. March the streets together. Keep the body flickering. Make the voice resist quiet. This going, this coming is resistance. 9, all shirts will be buttoned. This is how we mean business. You come to school bien fino, and we will teach you the 4 winds, the reasons we are always armed to the touch of a blade. We are always blades, bien filosos. 10, be sure that your classroom is reasonably clean before you let the class out at the end of the day. One day, all of these classrooms will no longer hold any of us. Leave no evidence we were here. We exist in the whisper, the tender cinnamon strings in muscle. Marcha, yeah. This last poem is the poem that was just recently came out for Poem a Day a few days ago at the end of March. Dedicated to the moving memory of my mother and the light that is our daughter. La Suavecita. We dress my daughter in amarillo, not butter or sunlight or mirasol, maybe an Easter yellow, maybe a Dia de los Muertos yellow, a baby chick yellow. It doesn't matter. She flickers around the house all barefoot. She takes you by the hand and makes you play La Suavecita on repeat. Her hair and brown, bouncy pigtails all day. She watches your mouth, the way you say tambores, the way you say cumbia. She won't stop smiling. When she laughs, I hear my mother. I am back in her house, all barefoot, dancing to the same song. My mother dresses in a teal bata, not Miami or peacock or Tiffany blue, maybe an Easter blue, maybe a Dia de los Muertos teal, a robin egg teal. It doesn't matter. She flitters around the house. She takes me by the hand and teaches me how to spring my arms, how to move my hips, how to follow the beat already in my legs. She tells me, ay, mijo, one day, las muchachas will want to spend the night with you on the dance floor. Find those feather feet. Carry a smile and laugh, mijo, laugh. I ask to play the song again and run to rewind the cassette tape all day. My mother is all baila, baila, all brown curls of bobbing hair, abriendo sus brazos the moment I learn how to spin her in our shotgun house. She won't stop smiling. My mother loves the color yellow. There is a sing, a flow around inside. My daughter oohs the color teal. When they lay eyes on each other, they watch each other's mouths just to see who smiles first. I'm just here, waiting to see who wants to dance. Si no la invito, me invita ella. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lupe, for that beautiful reading. And now I would like to welcome Jasmine.
Hello, good evening, buenas tardes. Thank you, Marcelo, for having us. For those who don't know, that may not know, Lupe and I are married, so yes, and we're just we're in two different rooms of the house. So I'm going to read 4 pieces. The first one's really short, and the first 3 are from my forthcoming collection, Machete, which part of the manuscript is about the 1937 Haitian massacre along the Dominican-Haitian border. Which was a state-sanctioned attempted genocide by Rafael Trujillo, like I said, in 1937, against the Haitian population along the border. And so some of the poems, one of the poems that you'll hear is in the voice of the machete, because the machete was the weapon of choice used to enact the killings. So that's the only preface I'm going to give, and I'm just going to go through and read the 3 pieces, and then I'll talk a little bit about the last one, because it's from a new collection as well. Along the border, after Idra Novi. On a dirt road, on a drive to El Campo, you found a bate. I cut the cane. We sucked on a stalk. You gave me your arms. I swam in the river. We locked the door. Then the lights went out and the radio played. You fingered the pesos. I walked to the beach. We fried the fish. You ate the mango. I jumped in the water. We bought the flowers. Then the migrants came, and you bartered for more. Then the sirens blared, and they were carried away. But we didn't stop them. Then the ocean swept, and the palm trees sagged. They were foreigners. We were foreigners, and we lived there. Machete, I swing. Call me what you want. Gift, weapon, thief. From the inside out, a CT scan slices you, a photograph you cannot forget, a memory you cannot hold. Dominican, American, Haitian, American, American, American. I hyphenate you into the you are. Tissue rot, stem cells, a bundle of knuckles, a harvest of fingertips, a soil of pincer grips. Hold still, just breathe, count to 10. I swing. After the fog, a rusty tongue sticks and clicks your heavy metal breath. A metronome marks my song. A ballad that begins and ends in blood. A cacophony of green hands and blue mouths migrate towards your borders. Stretch skin, collect scars, cut and carry them to the altar of your almost fist. Steel cut, sharp needle, silk scalpel, your stemmed finger, a root rot eviction notice where blood trembles and I belong, bent like stripped winds, soft, silent, serene, sink under, then sleep, between salt grass and palmas. I swing. Call me by my name. Kukiri, hawkbill, cane. And then this last piece. Okay, so you all are getting brand new, hot off the press, has never been read aloud work. I just wrote this, and I won't say where it's in the manuscript, so I won't give it away, but I wrote, agonized over this piece this week. And I know it still needs work, so, but I'm excited to share because it is brand new. And here goes. How to build an altar. 1, gather photos. Scribble the names of the dead on the back of your hands. Name each finger until you run out of hands or names or fingers. Fold them into flowers and plant them into the pages of this book. Water them with want and waiting. Kneel until they night blossom into palms or prayers we will one day hold and inherit. 2, make an offering. A bounty of rice, a twirl of white ribbons, the scent of lilies, a shot of rum, a slip of sand, a bed of water, un suspiro o un cigarro, almonds or chocolate, sugar cane or silver coins, blue stones, red clay, una muñeca sin rostro, a mural of elegies, a bouquet of hair, a baby's blanket or its whisper, your bulging grief, my swallow, yesterday, yesterday, yesterday. 3, ask questions. What is the body without a name? Where am I from? Are you sure we're not Haitian? Where have we been? Where is home without a border? Where are you from? Could we be Haitian? Why do you want to know? 4, pray. You are here. I am here. We are here. We are still here. 5, say their names. And that's that. So then I feel like I'm going really quickly, but the last piece, I might share 2 from this, just the 2 opening pieces that I'll share is doing something a little different here tonight. They're the opening poems from my middle grade novel in verse that I'm really excited to be working on and to just eventually one day be putting out into the world. And so it's a little bit more light, a little bit lighter than the machete work. And so I wanted to end on a slightly more joyful note. And the gist of it is there is a young girl who loves to swim, and her mom has this sort of very painful trauma around water and oceans and a hurricane, and so she refuses to let her daughter near the ocean or swimming pools, and so it's sort of this, right? They have this confrontation, right? This situation happening between the mother and the daughter, but the father is very keen on his daughter swimming, and so they have sort of this secret that they keep from the mother for the daughter to swim. And then there's also a lot of other complications that occur in the book. It's a story about chronic illness and family and water and love and all of those things. So these are just the 2 opening pieces from that current work in progress. The first time, or how I learned to swim. Because mommy does not want me in the water, it is papi who teaches me how to swim. Before my brother Mateo was born, before I learned how to keep secrets, before I learned what my name meant or how it tied me to the water, I tremble near the edge of a pool. I am 6 and still afraid of everything. My knees knock, knock, knock against each other. A warm August wind whooshes through my tangled curls. I almost let go of my Minnie Mouse beach towel when Papi pushes me a little closer to the edge. I jump back as if the pool is a sinkhole of blue flames. My squeal, a high-pitched trumpet tingling my tonsils. No, 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 I don't want the water in my eyes, in my nose, in my lungs. Mommy says that the water, shh, mi reina, no pasa nada. Papi sits me on his lap, tells me a cuento to calm mis nervios. The first time I swam in the green rivers of El Campo, the current slapped me around until my arms began to flip and my legs began to flap, and suddenly I was flying underwater. Your body will know what to do. Sorry, your body will know how to handle the water as long as you don't resist. Papi's big brown arms wrap around my waist. His warm breath tickles my ear. His black beard sweeps against my cheek. He whispers, Concéntrate. Stroke your arms as if you are painting the water purple or pumpkin. Kick your legs like Tío Pedro when he paddles his palms on a palo drum. Keep your body feather light and you'll float. Let the water hold you. Remember, I am right beside you. He squeezes my hand. 1, 2, 3, we jump in. And then I'll just do this one's fairly short because I have to give a shout out because Texas. And the book is set in Galveston. So my island. We live on an island. The island where we live is an outstretched arm reaching into the Gulf of Mexico, Galveston, where the streets are lined with papel picado houses in peacock green and pomegranate pink, hundreds of shotgun houses in sherbet colors that remind mommy of back home. But this is the only home I've ever known. On Sundays before church, I like to walk to the seawall and watch the sunrise explode in the sky like cascarrones on Easter. Blue, pink, and orange colors confetti the horizon and kiss the sea. Sometimes I don't know if the ocean is the sky or the sky is the ocean. It opens big, wide, endless, the way I do when I swim. Sometimes I think that if I swim long enough, I'll reach that cascarron sky, and instead of swimming, I'll begin to soar. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. That was beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And I feel so just so grateful to have you and your voices and here in community. So thank you for that. I mean, so many things running through my head that I wanted to talk about. And I kind of want to give space for each of you and for the particulars of your work, and also some crossover themes. So I guess I'd want to ask, starting with Jasmine, in thinking about the poem that you read, How to Build an Altar, and in this essay that you wrote, Motherhood Maps and More, in which Luz Maria, your daughter, dances because children understand music before they understand words. And elsewhere you have said, your poetry is for women, for amas de casa bearing rifles and marching in skirts. I guess I would want to ask you, Jasmine, first, and then Lupe can chime in. But how much of your work has been guided towards your daughter and your relationship with her and her place in the world? Maybe do you hope that one day she will read what you have written about her? And I guess this is a question of audience, like, who do you see? Who do you see as the? You've already answered that. Who do you see the reader is? But maybe more specifically, how do you want the reader to participate in the act of the poem? Are you reading to them or are you reading with them? There's a lot. Or you can touch on any of those.
No worries. Yeah, those are great. Those are great questions. I'll start with sort of the daughter one. I think it's an interesting dynamic. Obviously, after I had her, my relationship with writing changed for many reasons. Even just what I was interested in writing, I've totally immersed myself in the kidlit world, which I love and is so much fun and is just very challenging in its own ways and exciting in other ways and just different than sort of the poetry world, and yet similar. But I did that because I was like, I want something that she can read now. I want, stories of her Mexican culture, of her Dominican culture, of just her bi-cultural self, right? And biracial self I want her to see that from the moment she is a baby, from the moment she is little. And having taught in K through 12 for so many years and struggling to find even just a few picture books and narratives and stories and things like that about, you know, Afro-Latinos, about Dominicans. You know, it was, I knew that there wasn't a lot out there. And so I chose in that sense to start writing in that genre, so that from the moment that she's been a baby, you know, she can grow up with that work. But it's also interesting because so much of my work is centered on the Black Latinx experience, and highlighting that experience. And my daughter, like, is not Black, right? She's not, she's Afrodescendiente, but she's not Black presenting. And so it's an interesting dynamic, an interesting thing that I think about constantly, because when I do write these books, specifically sort of in the kidlit world, or even just the poetry that she'll be able to access as she gets older, it is very much with the lens of like, this is about the Black experience across the diaspora, right? And so knowing that she may not necessarily see herself in that work, right? And so that's also something interesting to think about, but that I want her to obviously empathize and be like aware of and cognizant of, like, you know, her sort of mestiza skin affords her certain privileges as well as it doesn't, right? That's sort of a complex situation there as well. But just being aware that, like, this was my mom's experience, like, as a Black woman in the United States, as a Black woman in the world, you know, this is what she lived, and this is what the people that look like her, that's what they experience. And I come from that. And actually, there was another poem that I was going to read that kind of addressed a little bit of that. But yeah, I always say, you know, and I know it's cheesy, but I always go back to the Toni Morrison quote of, like, everything I write is with the thought of, if there's a book you want to read that hasn't been written, then you must write it. And that's my entire philosophy. Like, everything I ever write is because 9-year-old Jasmine wanted to read it, 13-year-old Jasmine wanted to read it, 25-year-old Jasmine wanted that book or needed that book. And so I definitely, you know, put that in there. And I think to the second part of your question, I was listening to, I feel awful because I forgot his name, but I've only seen him like kind of online sporadically. And he did this whole thing on Instagram. He's a new editor, and he talked about the kinds of books that he was going to acquire and wanted, and he just kind of left it very open. But he was, you know, you said, who is your reader, or who are you talking to or with? And he actually sort of changed that with, are you writing? And he was talking specifically, I think, like kind of to Black writers. He was saying, are you writing to Black people, or are you writing for Black people? And so, right, it's this idea of, like, you know, and I struggle with that, right? Because I think a lot of my early work, and still some of the things that I write, is like, I still have that white gaze in mind. And it's like, oh, I have to explain what a plátano is because this, you know, my audience isn't going to get it. But if I say in my head, like, no, my audience is other Dominicans, I don't need to explain what plátanos maduros are. I don't need to explain what habichuelas are. Like, this is for Dominicans, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, you know, you have to sort of, and he explained it so much better, and I'm kind of like butchering what he said, but again, this idea of, like, there is a difference, right? And I think one of the examples he used was James Baldwin, of, like, he is not writing, he's not writing like to Black people, because his work was like written basically for white people, like, to understand the Black experience, right? And so thinking about that dynamic, and because even your lexicon's going to change, and like sentence structure, like all of that, just like the way that the piece is written is going to change depending on, are you writing about the Black experience for a white audience, or are you writing about the Black experience for a Black audience? And like, and I still, you know, it's something that I think about constantly. I don't know that, yeah, it changes, and there's always different intentions, I think, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that to, about, for, or with, in terms of your audience. I mean, it changes wildly. And yeah, I mean, I would ask the same of Lupe, maybe how, you know, dancing and your daughter has come up and seems to be a continuing trope. And you know, I follow you and your family on Instagram, and I see, you know, how much joy there is. And you know, just today I was walking at a park with my son and my wife Ruby, and I asked Ruby, how old does Julia need to start to be for us to start, like, and I just said it like in joking, like, for us to start teaching him critical race theory. But we were talking about how we have had to alter his books, even though he doesn't know that we're altering them, to alter like the narratives, to alter the people, to alter. And there was a video that went viral about a son who's grown up and coming to the realization that his parents had altered all his books to be more inclusive.
I saw that. I remember seeing that video.
Yeah. And you know, thinking about, as writers with younger ones, how much of your work has been guided towards her and your relationship with her, um, her place in the world. And again, you see the resemblance, Lupe, you see the resemblances between your daughter and your mother in that poem. Again, and I'm so sorry to hear about her passing. Um, but what do you think of Her Will Live On Forever in Luz Maria?
I keep thinking they used to do, well, I've taught for quite a while, and we used to do this with the high school students. It was a circle of privilege activity, which was also a privileged activity to begin with. But you have a large group of students stand on this outer circle, and then you make a series of statements. And if you haven't experienced this thing, you keep going, and you step into this next circle until you get like to the very center core thing. And that anybody who stands on the most outside circle has had a level of privilege. And the closer you get to the center are those individuals who haven't actually had those things. And having done that practice with just our faculty that I was teaching with, it came down to like me, Argentinian history teacher, and our black math teacher. Like basically the three of us had like the kind of roughest upbringings and like lacked a lot of things. But one of the ones that caught me off guard, that was like, oh man, I didn't even think of that. One of the statements was, did you grow up with books in your house? And I did. Like everything that I've known about language began with conversation and music, and then comic books, right? My first language being Spanish, learning English through reading comics, and then going to school. Growing up in the 70s here in Texas and in Mexico, traveling between both spaces. My father to this day is still illiterate in both languages. He has the equivalent of a second grade education in Mexico. So I have always been cognizant of the lack of language across my two households, right? My mother's household in the Rio Grande Valley, and then my father's family in Mexico. So I'm keenly aware of the importance on a very basic level. So it's in terms of how that connects, like how I'm thinking of parentage with Luz and Luz Maria and everything else that we're doing. And because of the fact that in a very similar situation, Luz Maria is currently, she's an only child. I grew up as an only child. And so it is this very sobering notion that I have to remember as much as possible and record those things as much as possible. Because if somebody, Dios no quiere, someone passes away, all I then have is my memory of that thing, of who they were and how they proceeded in the world. So now, most especially with my mother's passing, she didn't write a whole lot. She read a ton, but we didn't have like a full-on library in the house. So I have a few of her books. I have a long history with the music that we danced to in the house, the 8-tracks that were in that. Like I can vividly remember the box of the 8-tracks and the order that they were in, and the conversations my parents would have on what they would buy music-wise, and the songs we listened to in the car. And so for me, that's where that language begins, right? It's all connected back to this music. And looking at that, it's to begin those understandings is the rhythm, right? It's the son of the day. It's how we end up communicating first with her was through music. We could put on whatever songs in the house and she would start wiggling to it. And I started making a playlist of songs that we thought she liked. and still she'll tell us to play that song again. So if she's asked us to like play a song over and over, I just add it to the playlist and we just
And
keep
not
it.
to you up, but there are songs that like she's actually listening to that we're not aware that she's learning, and then they'll randomly come on and she'll start singing, and I'm like, whoa, when did you learn that?
Right?
And in English, because we only speak Spanish at home, and so like if she like if she says the like Spanish lyrics, like we get that. But the other day we were in the car and a Lizzo song came on, and she started, she goes at the very intro at the Lizzo song, she goes, "It's good as hell," and I was like, what what is that? Where did that come from?
I wanted to do a Lipa the other day, and we were like, what the? And so, but like,
so wild.
It is this wild notion that the legacy of her lineage is also bound to the songs that I didn't just grow up on, but it's the music of my mother and my father, right? Like for her grandmother, it was Patsy Cline and Hank Williams y Las Hermanas Huerta, right? When my father passes, it'll be Las Higuerillas, it'll be Antonio Aguilar. Like it's all these leveled layers of the music. Like when I pass, it'll be Earth, Wind, and Fire and like Dua Lipa and Selena. It'll be all these like layered levels of the music, but it starts with just that bass, right? And I feel like a lot of my work over the years has always had this. I always borrow a lot. Like there's always ringing in my head a line from a song. And so a lot of my work, even in my last collection, Why I Am Like Tequila, I borrow lines of I wrote a poem about the first song I learned in English was Rod Stewart's If You Think I'm Sexy. Was the first English song I ever learned, right? And it's a disco song. I'm like, that is a trashy song to have first learned the words to, right? But that's in my lexicon, like that's in my vocab. And so I'm not going to shy away because there's a story attached to that. And so in writing about the song La Suavecita, the bass at the beginning of the song, that's the first thing that caught Luz's attention. And I thought I had this big, huge grin on my face when the song came on and she started bopping in the car. And I immediately thought back to the first time I heard that song and us dancing to the record player in my house in the summer when I was a little kid. And so I was like, it's part history repeating itself, part, that next level of the line. And then it becomes these conversations, right? Like I can tell my dad, I was like, oye, tu nieta, like se arrancó con la suavecita, and he'll laugh because he knows where it comes from, right? And so it's lo que va y viene. It's part of that legacy is there.
Yeah, and to continue kind of to follow up on that, and then also geared towards Jasmine. There was a book review in the Latino Book Review by Elliot Turner, in which he about Why I'm Like Tequila, in which he says the most impressively that you adroitly shift among narrative, dramatic, and lyrical poems within the collection. And loosely dividing the collection into these four themes. I guess I wanted to maybe follow up with that. What would you agility to be able to move between these kind of different registers. And for Jasmine, you do both of you, but particularly I wanted to ask Jasmine, you do podcast, theater, YA, personal essays with poetry alone, children's book. You both teach, you both organize, you're both activists. Is there something you feel can mainly, I don't want to say only, but mainly can be accomplished through poetry? Thus, why Machete exists as poetry, versus prose, versus YA, versus theater. Is that part of why you've expanded out to so many genres? So, yeah, maybe Jasmine can touch on that, and then Lupe can touch on the different registers of form that Elliot Turner talked about.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that that in poetry, I go to poetry when there is more of like the emotional quality, more of the things that I don't necessarily have the language for, that just telling the story, I feel like people would be like, I don't believe that, or oh my gosh, that's an exaggeration, or you're not going to get sort of at the emotional core, you're not going to get at the heart of like of the experience of the physical, emotional, historical experience, in just sort of the straight narrative, right, that you would maybe in prose, or in a straight play. And I will say a caveat is that Machete is actually City Without Altar. They're the same. They're basically the same exact piece of work, except one is adapted for the stage. And I think that there's even more layers to that, because I think theater can also contain poetic elements through movement, right? Like your body can be a poem, and we can see that on stage. And so I plan to incorporate that and hope to see that happen, right? That the whole production itself, with the lighting and the sound and everything, is poetry also. I mean, even the stage directions are written as sort of like mini poems between the actual poems, or the persona poems. And so really experimenting with that and playing with that. But again, if to me it goes to being able to create a feeling and an image in the mind of the listener, of the reader, that maybe that I sometimes feel like could take longer in prose, whereas with poetry you have like the brevity of the language, you have the conciseness, the precision of the language and the metaphor. And for me, I'm been called recently a lyrical poet, which I'm still trying to figure out what that means. And that you can really kind of capture with a lot of with language that maybe isn't as accessible. If you're like, this is a prose piece, and people are like, what is happening on the page? Like they're expecting to make sense of it in maybe a more chronological, cohesive way. Whereas with poetry, I definitely see myself much more, especially lately, as a collagist. Like I'm a collage artist, and usually, lately I've been writing like 4 poems to say one thing, and then I take those 4 poems and I'm like, let me cut out all the BS and make the one poem that I'm actually trying to write. And suddenly I'm a collage artist. Like I'm literally cutting and pasting and making this one piece of artwork. And I think that's what's the beautiful thing about what you can do with poetry, because you're really playing with language, you're finding language, you're disrupting language. I'm very big on like, taking one idea, like it starts with one thing, and then in the middle of the sentence, you're like, next line, you're suddenly in a whole different thought, but you could connect it 2 different ways, right? Like the line breaks are so important. The white space, I love playing with white space. Like it's hard to get away with that in prose. I mean, you wrote a memoir, creative nonfiction, like you can try, people are going to look at you sideways, right? And so you got to do it well. Whereas with poetry, like you can mess around so much on the page and with all of that. And I just think that really creates, a certain feeling and sense in the reader, or the listener. And I'm very much a big believer that poetry is meant to be read aloud. Like I don't believe that it should only exist in a book. And I think it's very much a spoken art form in order to really live in its truest form, to listen, to really hear the language and the vibrations and the rhythm and sort of the sound. And I just think that there's so much more that you can do and or get away with, if that's the right phrasing, in poetry that isn't necessarily as, you're sometimes stuck to a few more confines, I think, in prose for sure, or in like a straight format of like a play, like telling a play like chronological. Like if you start cutting and pasting, a prose piece and then just kind of like see what happens, like you might not get the most cohesive story. So I think that to me is, and it allows me, fiction does this also, but I've seen, having written this series of persona poems, that it allows me to really, I am able personally to better understand and interrogate these voices and these persons, these historical individuals, and these voices that I'm sort of calling forth and speaking through, and also in a very delicate way, right? Like being mindful of my own positionality and being mindful of my own privileges and where I stand as I write these poems in these other voices, as these personas. And I just think it makes me just a more like mindful, empathetic, and just kind of like, I don't know if astute is the right word, but I'm just more cognizant of like humanity around me in doing so.
Yeah. And so a little bit, I guess, going back to that, the review about shifting among narratives from the dramatic to the lyrical, so on and so forth. Why do you think, what necessitated that? Was it the content of the poems themselves, or again, is there certain subjects that lend themselves easier for narrative, and other subjects that lend themselves easier towards the more lyric. Maybe emotion falls somewhere in between.
I feel like I think it's more couched in the more emotive level of where you're at in the headspace of a piece, right? Like I'm always perplexed and always in awe and in wonder in the labels of so and so is a writer and poet, so and so is a playwright, and it's all writing. Like even when you're hunting for funding to do all these craft things, there's a difference between playwrights, screenplay writers, and blah. And to me, it's like, did you saw something different? You wanted to do it that way, so you said, "To hell with it! I'm gonna write it here."
Yeah.
And so it's where you are headspace, or where you are in the emotive nature, or where you are with how you want to be able to project that narrative, because it's all a form of a narrative thing, and yet the most ancient form of the way these stories takes place is the poem, epic or otherwise, or spoken. Like all of these things sprout from the necessity of expression, right? So even now, as I'm trying to work together with this collection, I don't even know right now if it's just a poetry collection, because I've got a lot of essays, not and as well as interviews that I've taken out the question that I've asked, and just let the person who was speaking in the interview, I let that breathe, and it reads differently, right? And these are the choices that we make. But I also think it's the collected voice of the individual who is choosing to put that work out there in a particular way. Both Jasminne and I have our first loves were theater, right? Like, so performatively seeing the way the page lays out, so that we get to practice with the instinct and be able to put ourselves in other personas to express a character, like that lays out a whole different set of semantics and schemas in order to be able to write the things that we end up writing for ourselves, right? And so that level of both energy, and then like the plot elements, the ways that we pinpoint what are those things, that the stories that we want to be able to tell, I think that's where some of it comes from. Yeah.
I mean, I have so many more questions. I am mindful of time, so maybe I want to ask a few questions and let you choose which one you would like to talk about. I think one of the commonalities that we three have is that we're educators, and I know that mentorship means a lot to you. Both the kind of mentorship that you sponsor, and then also the kinds of mentors that we seek. And I am of the mind that I try to be a better teacher in order to be a better artist. That my work gets better when my teaching gets better, because I'm steeped in the material, and I teach what I love. So maybe how has your experiences as an educator influenced your work as a writer? And the other one that maybe you can consider is uh, who do you see yourself in conversation with? Also being together, do you see yourselves also influencing each other's work? Do you see like bouncing off? And I know Luz Maria is happens to be one of the subject matters that you both take on, but is there other ways in which you kind of orbit around some of the same things?
I think in terms of, go
ahead. Well, I do think that our work is in conversation with each other, both intentionally and unintentionally. Oftentimes, we've been together 16 years. So of course, there's so much that we've experienced together that then we go off on our own and like write these poems, which later we find out like, oh, I wrote about that and I wrote about that. And they're like, oh, okay. So then these are experiences that like we're seeing, each other, how we processed that experience, right? Whether it was my miscarriage or, our fertility journey or, me being in the hospital and my illness, or whether it was, the death in the family, loss of a job, whatever it was, like we were both experiencing it together. But then obviously had different experiences of that moment. And so I think that definitely, that work then is in conversation with each other, as well as I think we both grapple with this idea of otherness, right? And how that plays itself out in the world and in our writing, and right. And so we both feel othered in different ways. And I think that is just a natural way that our work is in conversation, as well as living in the wonderfully problematic state that is Texas, and writing things about that, and the politics that we're both constantly always sort of up against, and in conversation with, and arguing and fighting against, and all of these things, right? Where I think a lot of our work is in conversation in that way as well. And I think it just really quickly with relation to your first question, I think just like you, teaching makes me a better writer, a better thinker, a better, just like more, I'm able to kind of process and analyze my own work based on the way in which I teach others and the work that I receive to give feedback on. For sure. I think, because I see something that somebody else does, and then I'll make a comment. I'm like, oh wait, but I did that too. And so like, I can go back and be like, I should, and I also love seeing, new writers work, because then they take so many more risks than some of us who've been doing this for a little while sometimes do. We kind of get stuck in our habitual patterns and ways in which we craft things. And then we see something and we're like, oh, that's so dope, and so like, oh, wow, they're less afraid sometimes to take those risks, I think. And so that's definitely exciting to see and to be a part of.
Yeah.
I guess in a much more viejito, you damn kids, get off my lawn kind of grouchy old man way, I view, like, I look at the work that I see younger writers putting together, and Jasmine's right. Like, you're like, man, the risks that, what? Because I wasn't doing that when I was their age. But then I also have to catch myself and be like, wait, let me give myself some credit. I didn't have access to certain things that they might have had quicker access to. And I'm glad that they had that quicker access to it. And I'm glad that I'm like there to be able to say, hey, also read this, also read that. Wait, what are you reading? Wait, tell me that. Show me how to put that in my phone right now with that app, like those things. And I love having that kind of a conversation with younger writers, because it's always the learning process, right? It's I always think to the concept of, as I'm teaching and as I coach teachers, moving towards being the lifelong learner in every shape and form, right? Not being afraid to, like, sit down and ask the questions from someone younger who might know a thing or two at the same time that you're also in conversation about, those next things that they could be doing as well. And then in terms of how our work speaks with one another, like, we take on similar projects or different projects, and we're always like, hey, I wrote this, listen. And it could be while we're doing laundry, or when we're laying in bed, or after
and then we get mad at each other because, like, he'll want to just read my poem aloud that I wrote, and I'm like, no, I want to read it to you, or like vice versa. And it's just like, and I'll just be like, I don't want to hear your poet voice. Just let me read it. Just hand me, the phone or the computer, and I'll read it to myself. And then he gets mad, and so we.
Or it'll be like, she'll read a poem or she'll read a piece, and I'm like, well, did you try about doing it this way? Like,
kills me. I hate it. He's like, now invert the whole thing. And then I do, and it sounds better. And I'm like, screw you. Go somewhere.
And then she walks off, and I'm like, what? You want dinner? I ordered spaghetti. But so it's that level. Like, even now, we're both, like, as she's been working on the collection that she's working on now, a lot of the docu-poetry work that started that off was part of a conversation as I was fooling with my work during my MFA time. And so like, this is what this is how it looks, this is what it could be. And so building off of that, like, sharing those ideas and in inquiry.
Realistically, like somebody could, once his second book comes out or much of that comes out, if they're teaching a docu-poetry class, like both of our books could be a part of the syllabus, which would be really neat. So in that way, even the way we craft things, right, is in conversation, right? They both use documents, they both looked at archives, they both created work that refashioned a history, if you will. And yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. And so much more. I'm very, very grateful for your generosity. So thank you. This has been wonderful. And please be sure to check out each of their work. You can see that in the comments there, thepoetmendez.com and jasminnemendez.com/writing for their latest work, for forthcoming work, and all of the projects that are in between. Again, Lupe, Jasmine, thank you so much for
Thank you, Marcelo.
Thank you.
Hug that little boy of yours.
Likewise. All right.
We love you.
Love you too. Bye.
Bye.